Story 1. The Plura Cave. Diving tragedy. Norway's deadliest dive. I still remember the way the water swallowed their lights first, like the cave itself had blinked and erased them from existence. The echo of bubbles was all that remained.
We were a small team of Finnish divers, drawn by the infamous Plura Cave in Norway.
Stories whispered among the European diving community painted it as a siren, beautiful, treacherous, and unforgiving. Nobody entered lightly, and fewer returned with stories that made sense. I had trained for years for this, each dive in cold Nordic waters a preparation for the impossible, a descent into Plura's deepest reaches. The day began clear, the fjord sparkling under an indifferent summer sun. From the surface, the cave mouth looked innocuous, just a jagged slit in the rock wall, like a mouth waiting to exhale. The locals had warned us not to push too far. Even seasoned Norwegians had come back shaken, their stories fragmented, teeth gritted as if some silence haunted them. But curiosity and perhaps hubris made us disregard the cautions. We suited up, heavy gear clinking in the crisp air, each of us double-checking regulators, tanks, and lights. I remember the metallic taste of my own nerves as I slipped beneath the surface. The cold hit like an unwelcome hand, fingers curling around my throat, and then there was only the tunnel. Plura's entrance narrowed immediately. The light from above faded quickly, leaving us in an opaque green twilight. The walls pressed close, sharp limestone jutting like teeth. Our fins kicked up clouds of silt, and the bubbles from our regulators rose in tight columns, trembling in the low current. Each exhale was audible to me, too loud, too human, in this unnatural silence.
We advanced slowly, one after another, following the taut guideline we had painstakingly laid before us.
The cave branched unpredictably. Every twist felt deliberate, as if the rock itself wanted us to get lost. Somewhere behind us, I thought I heard another diver exhale, but the sound didn't match their rhythm. It was too long, almost a whisper, yet clearly human. I dismissed it as imagination. About 40 minutes in, we reached the first chamber, a cavern larger than anything above ground could contain. Stalactites hung like jagged chandeliers, and water shimmered against the walls with the dull glow of our lights. Here, the temperature dropped sharply. My skin pricked with the icy sting of fear, but the others seemed unaffected, chatting in clipped Finnish, voices muffled through regulators. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We pressed on deeper. The tunnel constricted again, the walls slick and narrow. I was first in line, my light carving a shaky path through the green gloom. Suddenly I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong. It slipped past the edge of my light, faster than anything I could track. I blinked against my mask, heart hammering. The other divers were still visible behind me, oblivious or pretending to be. Minutes stretched. Every turn became disorienting. Passages looped back, or maybe the echo of our own breathing made it impossible to tell. Then came the first accident. Yari, who had been meticulous about gear and safety, panicked when his light flickered. I heard his regulator choke, a staccato bubble trail racing ahead of him, before disappearing into the darkness. My pulse froze as his form twisted in the tunnel. By the time I reached him, he had jammed against the wall, flailing, eyes wide behind his mask. I grabbed his tank, tried to steady him, but it was too late. He vanished from the guideline, and only the rushing of bubbles remained. Panic spread silently among the rest of us. Each turn seemed to stretch farther than before, each chamber darker, colder, and more oppressive. Communication became limited to hand signals, which only added to the anxiety. Somewhere ahead, a faint light pulsed erratically, then vanished. Another diver, or perhaps a trick of the water and silt. We pressed forward despite the unease. Then Carrie, who had always joked about fear being a luxury we couldn't afford, began screaming through her regulator. A voice distorted, terrifyingly mechanical. She thrashed against the wall, breaking the guideline for a fraction of a second. That split second was enough. I watched, helpless as she was sucked into a narrow fissure, her flashlight bobbing before it disappeared completely. The water seemed to hold its breath with me. By this point, we were no longer a team, only individuals linked by a fragile rope of necessity. Every turn of the cave brought a new terror. The feeling of being watched. Sudden drops in temperature that made lungs burn. And strange noises. Soft clicks and muted rumbles that might have been rock settling or something else entirely. I couldn't tell where reality ended and fear began. We reached the final chamber, the one Norwegian divers had called the Heart of Silence. It was immense, a cathedral of limestone, and the ceiling stretched beyond our light's reach. But the silt was thick here, nearly choking, and the current strong. We tried to regroup, to anchor ourselves, but visibility was next to nothing. Then I felt it, pressure on my chest, not from the water, but from the space itself. The cave seemed alive, breathing slowly, waiting. One by one, the remaining divers disappeared, slipping from sight, caught by narrow cracks, or simply swallowed by the darkness. I tried to follow, tried to keep calm, but the guideline looped impossibly. No matter which way I swam, I ended up somewhere I had already been. Bubbles rose lazily in the stagnant water, and somewhere a faint light flickered, someone or something, mirroring my own movements. Hours or perhaps minutes passed. Time became meaningless. My lungs screamed for air. My limbs ached from constant finning, yet I couldn't turn back. The exit had become a phantom, a promise the cave no longer intended to honor. And then I saw them, shadows along the walls, indistinct but clearly humanoid. They did not move like divers. They didn't breathe. But they followed, always just beyond my light. Finally, with strength I didn't know I had, I clawed back toward the entrance. The cold was biting, the water a physical weight pressing me down. I emerged, gasping into the fjord under the late afternoon sun. My team never made it out. Rescue divers found their tanks and masks later, scattered through the cave's labyrinthine tunnels, as if the cave had vomited them up, partially digested by silence. To this day, I can't think of Plura without feeling it watching me. Sometimes at night I dream of returning. Lights bobbing in endless tunnels, shadows moving just out of reach, and the silent, mechanical pulse of water that whispers my name. I know I should never go back, but a part of me is still there, tangled in the cave, listening for the next diver foolish enough to enter. The Norwegian authorities eventually closed parts of the cave, citing safety, but rumors persist. Some say the cave has a mind of its own, feeding on the fear of those who enter. Others claim you can hear bubbles rising from its depths, even on calm summer days, long after the divers were gone. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I can hear a regulator choke in the dark, as if someone, or something, is still down there, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to follow. Story 2, The World's Deepest Cave Flood, Verevkina's Deadly Surprise. I can do that. Here's a chilling, self-contained horror story based on your premise. I remember the moment we realized the cave wasn't just dark, it was alive. The walls seemed to breathe, and the faint drip of water became a pulse we couldn't ignore. We were a combined Russian and British expedition, 15 in total, descending into the Verevkina cave, the world's deepest known abyss, somewhere beyond 2,200 meters below the surface. It was March, and the karst plateau above us was quiet, deceptively serene. The team joked nervously about the cold, the endless darkness, and the creaks of the rope systems. We were prepared, or at least we thought we were. The first hours were uneventful. Headlamps carved narrow cones of light into the black, revealing jagged limestone and pools that mirrored our nervous reflections. The air was damp, with a faint metallic tang, and the temperature had already dropped below zero. Somewhere ahead we could hear water moving in hollow channels, but it sounded distant, insignificant. We set up our first bivouac at 1,800 meters. I remember leaning against the slick rock, trying to steady my shaking hands as I checked my notes. That's when the first odd thing happened. A low hum, almost imperceptible, resonated through the walls. At first we laughed it off. Wind through cracks, someone muttered, but the sound didn't fade. It seemed to respond to us, louder when we moved, softer when we stayed still. By the time we reached the 2,200-meter mark, the cave had grown oppressive. The passages narrowed, forcing us to crawl, the rocks scraping our suits. Our headlamps bounced across the ceiling in erratic patterns, revealing sudden drops and hidden pits. The hum persisted, now accompanied by a vibration through the floor. Phones had no signal. Radios crackled uselessly, and a gnawing unease began to settle over the team. Then it started. A faint splash echoing from deep within the cave. Nothing alarming at first, just a ripple of water in some distant pool. But soon, more splashes followed, faster, heavier, until it became a rhythm, a rising chant. My stomach sank as our lead, Ivan, shouted for everyone to check the sump levels. Water, more than we anticipated. The ice above had melted faster than predicted, flooding the subterranean rivers. Within minutes, what had been a crawl through damp rock turned into wading through thigh-deep water. Our ropes slipped on slick stones, packs soaked instantly, and the temperature plummeted further. Phones and lights flickered. One by one, we realized we were trapped, not by rock, but by the water itself. Panic didn't happen all at once. It crept in like the water around our ankles, then knees, then chest. We tried to backtrack, but every route was already submerged. Our calls to the surface went unanswered. Comms were down. Someone suggested waiting it out, but Ivan's voice cut through the mounting dread. This is no ordinary flood. It's rising too fast. We found a narrow ledge and huddled together. The cold was immediate, clawing through gloves and suits, stealing breath. The hum had intensified into something almost vocal, a deep, resonant moan, like the cave itself was mourning, or warning us. Faces reflected in water that stretched endlessly into black. One by one, the team stopped speaking. The dripping, splashing, and low hum formed a grotesque symphony. Hours passed, maybe minutes. Time had warped into something unrecognizable. Some tried to distract themselves, reciting old stories, singing quietly, anything to keep the primal fear at bay. But the water kept rising, relentless, moving as if it knew exactly where we were. A rope we had relied on to climb out began to sway in the current, unseen and impossible to hold. Then came the cracks. Not in the rock, but in the silence. Strange whisper-like sounds coming from the water itself, overlapping the hum. Voices, or what sounded like voices, half-formed syllables, murmuring from every direction. We couldn't tell if it was the echo or something alive down there. And then, one by one, headlamps started dimming inexplicably, even those with fully charged batteries. Only the murky shapes of our teammates remained, shifting with the water, faces wide-eyed in terror. By the time the flood reached our ledge, we were submerged up to our chests. Communication with the surface was gone entirely, and even shouting felt futile, absorbed by the cave's vast emptiness. Panic became a collective heartbeat. Hands gripped ropes, fingers numb, teeth chattering. The water pushed harder, and we realized the ledge would not hold for long. I remember staring into the water, noticing shapes that shouldn't exist. Pools where shadows moved independently, reflections that weren't ours. Some of us tried to swim to higher ground, only to find air pockets smaller than our bodies, and then gone as the current swallowed them. It wasn't just the water, it was the feeling of being watched, guided, herded into the depths. Hours or maybe days later, we stopped moving. The cave had its own rhythm now. The hum had become a roar. Even breathing seemed loud enough to betray our presence. I sat frozen, chest pressed to cold rock, and realized the flood wasn't just water. It was something patient, deliberate, a slow claim of territory we had foolishly entered. When the rescue finally arrived days later, they found only traces. Empty suits clinging to rocks, personal items floating in half-frozen pools, headlamps flickering intermittently. Some equipment had traveled hundreds of meters from where it was left. No bodies. No definitive sign of what happened to us. Only the cave, silent again, hiding its secrets behind walls slick with water and shadow. Now, whenever I close my eyes, I hear the water rising, the faint hum, and the whispering. Verevkina isn't just the world's deepest cave. It's alive, and it doesn't forgive curiosity. Story 3. Ted the Carver, the internet's first viral cave horror. I first saw the cave on a grainy live stream, and even through my screen it seemed alive, like it was breathing. Ted had been posting videos for months, claiming he'd found an unmapped cave system in the Appalachian foothills. His first clips were unremarkable, tight tunnels, dripping water, faint echoes. But something about his tone, hushed and reverent, made it unsettling. He called it the hollow vein, and he described it as if it were a living entity, shifting and responding to his presence. When I stumbled onto his blog, it was late at night, the kind of hour when the wind feels heavier and the house suddenly too quiet. Ted's latest post included a shaky selfie at the cave entrance, his flashlight illuminating jagged rocks that seemed to lean toward him. Below the photo was the caption, "Something is watching from the dark. I hear it whispering my name." The first few paragraphs read like a typical adventure blog, but as I scrolled, the language changed. The sentences grew fragmented, anxious. He described hearing faint scraping noises, the way the stone seemed to shiver under his touch. "It's like the walls are alive," he wrote, "like they remember every step I take." Then came the hieroglyphics. Ted had photographed symbols etched into the stone, angular and twisting, forming patterns that looked familiar and impossible at once. He claimed they weren't human-made. Each photo was accompanied by a video clip of him tracing the markings with a gloved hand, whispering in a language he said he didn't understand. There were no screams, no monsters, just his voice echoing against the damp rock and the faint sound of something moving. I watched a clip where he followed a narrow tunnel deeper into the cave. His flashlight bounced off walls, slick with condensation. The floor was uneven, littered with jagged stones. Somewhere behind him, there was a low, grinding hum, like a stone shifting under pressure, but no one else was there. He stopped suddenly, pointed the camera at a shadow that didn't match the light. "I think it's alive," he whispered. "I think it's following me." I couldn't stop watching. Each post added a layer of dread. Ted described sudden chills, the way his flashlight flickered without explanation, the odd echoes that didn't match his movements. He posted audio recordings of whispering, indistinct and sibilant, as if someone or something was responding to him. But the more I watched, the more I noticed small inconsistencies. The tunnels repeated too neatly in multiple videos. Shadows didn't obey the light. Sometimes the drip of water stayed perfectly steady, as if someone had looped a recording. Weeks later, I learned the truth. Ted's blog had gone offline. Entire posts were scrubbed from the web, leaving only archived snippets and discussion threads filled with speculation. Friends who had met him said he'd vanished, though his social media suggested he had moved out of state. Investigators never found the cave he claimed to explore. Some posts, they discovered, had been fabricated with careful editing, CGI overlays, and audio tricks. The cave, and perhaps everything, was a story. But then I found one unlisted video, uploaded under a different username. It was short, under a minute, grainy and handheld. Ted's flashlight illuminates a passage, narrow and low. The camera pans quickly across the walls, and there, in the corner, I saw it. The faint outline of a symbol, etched deep into stone that should not have existed. The air in the recording seemed to shimmer, and in the background there was a whispering, just below comprehension. I sat back, heart pounding. I knew it was likely fabricated, just another clever hoax. But the sound of the whisper, impossibly close, made the hair on my arms rise. The more I replayed it, the more I became convinced it responded to my own breathing, my own movements, though I was alone. The edges of the video seemed to ripple, subtly, like the cave itself was trying to reach through the screen.
Even knowing it was a story, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cave, or what Ted claimed existed inside it, had followed him, or maybe me, into the real world.
The whispering continues in my mind, faint at first, growing sharper each night. I don't know if the cave was real, or if Ted's imagination conjured something that refused to stay contained. All I know is that sometimes when I'm alone, I hear a scratching at the walls of my apartment, soft and deliberate, like someone or something is trying to whisper my name. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see shapes shifting in the corner of my vision, angular and impossible, just like Ted's symbols. I tell myself it's a hoax, that it's all a story, but every time my flashlight flickers in the dark, I remember the way Ted described the cave, alive, waiting, remembering every step. And I realize, maybe some stories aren't meant to stay online. Maybe they reach further than the internet.